So, first of all, you have people like Ron Paul and Pat Buchanan and others who said, okay, the Cold War is over. It's time to come home and be non-interventionists now and, worry about our own problems. And famously, even the neoconservatives, Jeane Kirkpatrick, who had been Reagan's second ambassador to the UN and who had come from the Trotskyite left with the rest of the neocons and wrote for Commentary and all those guys. She said in 1990, before the Soviet Union was even all the way gone, she said, now that the Cold War is over, we can come home from Europe, come home from Asia and the Middle East and just be a normal country in a normal time. The entire kind of basis, the argument for building the American superpower, the global empire, was to contain the commie threat, to prevent the Reds from conquering the world. That was what they said. So now that the Soviet Union is falling apart and the Cold War with the communists is over, now we don't have to do this anymore. Except the problem is, of course, all the people who wanted to do this anymore, who didn't feel like they were being made to, but this is what they wanted to do, was, for one, sell big ticket weapons systems to the Pentagon, or maybe one wanted to buy big ticket weapon systems for the Pentagon, two wanted to sell them, three wanted to get reelected on campaign cash from connected businesses who get their money directly from the Treasury. It's a simple problem of organized power versus the unorganized, right? The people of the country want their peace dividend, but Lockheed doesn't want to have to get a real job. They are government contractors. And so they need to find a way to keep America militarized so that they can keep their budget flowing and their captive market buying. So that was the game. And of course, they can afford the lobbyists. The people out here in the country don't have lobbyists to protect us from their kind of predation. So it really is a matter of democracy not having anything to do with rights or anything like that, but more about democracy just as a faction fight for who gets the spoils, right? And there are people who are willing to fight like hell to keep the system the way it is, the way it was, so that they can keep going to the bank. It's as simple as that. Well, I shouldn't say it's as simple as
Did
that.
that all start
Part of
with
it is.
Eisenhower? Did like the whole military industrial complex? Eisenhower comes, he gives his goodbye speech of warning us about the military industrial complex.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together.
And I feel like Kennedy, JFK kind of took that to heart and really maybe was starting down that path of trying to disband this military industrial complex. And so then it's like, did the military industrial complex take out JFK? Did David Ben-Gurion, Israel proliferation of their nuclear program, not having to register as a foreign agent? Did they and Mossad take out JFK? Was it a combination? It definitely wasn't Oswald, but like when you say Raytheon and Lockheed Martin and these guys, I mean, this is like a legit thing that's been around 60 years and they've just been profiting like crazy off of war and death.
Yeah. Well, I really don't know who killed Jack Kennedy. I think, to me, Kennedy was really the Barack Obama of his day. And so, like, if somebody had killed Obama, they would have invented all these legends about how great he was and how the only reason he got killed was because of his heroism, whatever, where, like, a lot of that is retconning the story. You know what I mean?
Right?
I
Yeah.
think it is possible that it was the Israelis. I mean, they certainly had motive to do it. And for that matter, there were militarists in the Pentagon who wanted to expand in Vietnam, who maybe thought that he was dragging his feet there. I think all the stuff about how he wanted to end Vietnam and really put an end to the Cold War entirely in a second term are probably overstated. However, even I think Eisenhower thought he could end the Cold War before Kennedy even came to town, and his last big summit with Khrushchev was canceled over the shoot down of Gary Powers in the U-2 flight, which may have been deliberate sabotage. He had ordered an end to all flights, and then that plane got shot down, and Khrushchev canceled the summit. But essentially, Eisenhower, like they say, only Nixon can go to China. Eisenhower was in the position as five-star tough guy, Republican, two-term president, that he could have gone over there and made a deal with Khrushchev and said, okay, here are our spheres of influence and et cetera like that. Stalin's dead. Let's turn over a new leaf.
Yeah.
Instead, he did not do that. And then Kennedy and especially Johnson ran on a rapid military expansion. I mean, and Eisenhower had started the massive buildup of nuclear missiles, which Kennedy and Johnson continued. And it wasn't really till Nixon that they started putting a lid on that when we were at like 40,000 missiles. So, and that was especially Johnson, I guess, that did the worst of that buildup. Anyway, so this is the story, right? And I'm glad you mentioned Eisenhower. You know, for people who aren't too familiar with this, and you know, what the hell, there are people who were born not long ago to me who are adults now, right? Who might be very new at this. Ike Eisenhower was the supreme allied commander of NATO forces in Europe. He was a 5-star U.S. Army general. He, for the West's part, he was in charge of American, British, and then ultimately French forces and whatever allied forces fighting in Western Europe in World War II, and then came home and was the 2-term Republican president of the United States after Truman. And then, as you say, on his last day in office, he gave a speech called "Too Little, Too Late. Good luck, everybody. I don't know what the hell you're going to do, but I built this massive, monstrous military machine, and I can't wrestle it. I can't stop it. And I'm the baddest man on the continent. Good luck, you guys." And he had even said before, you know, I really fear for any president who doesn't know the military like I do and can't control them like I do. And like, quite frankly, the position that he was in, it took every bit of what he had as political capital and strength to tell the army, no, I already gave you more divisions, but I'm not giving you even more than that. I'm giving missiles to the Air Force instead. Pipe down, right? But it took everything he had when they just wanted to endlessly militarize and conscript and build up their legions. And so, you know, this was his new look policy was, no, we're just going to make nuclear missiles instead. That was his idea of getting control of the military industrial complex. The army wants an endless infantry. Instead, we're going to build missiles and bombers, you know, this kind of thing. So, so that's the complex. He built it. And then he warned us that this is the situation he was leaving us in, and good luck to us. He hopes we can solve it. And then, of course, we never did. That's the whole point here is when the Cold War ended, the Soviet Union's military industrial complex helped break their entire system, and it all fell apart at the end of the 80s. The Americans kept their empire. They refused to come home. And then, you know, there were great heroes like Chalmers Johnson who had believed in the Cold War the whole time and had been, you know, a right-wing Cold Warrior professor at USC and a contract analyst with the CIA for many years, who believed in it the whole time until it was over and the empire didn't come home. And then he was like, wait a minute. And he went back and he looked and he could see all the times where we really had off-ramps where we could have ended the Cold War years earlier, even with the Soviet Union still existing, by
Is he the one that
you know,
wrote
neutralizing its threat.
Did he write Blowback?
Yes, and
Okay.
also Sorrows of Empire, and then Nemesis, The Last Days of the American Republic, which are just all three fantastic books. And Blowback he wrote before September 11th, warning about just exactly that kind of consequence from American policy.
Got it. Yeah, like,
Anyway,
like.
yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah, no, go ahead.
Okay, well, I was just gonna say, because I'm taking the long way around trying to answer your question here, but essentially what it is this, man. At that, they took the opportunity to wage Iraq War I when they could have negotiated Saddam's exit from Kuwait. But once it was on and they decided we're doing this, there was no way to talk them out of it. They were definitely going to war. And then in the aftermath of that was when they inaugurated what's called the Wolfowitz Doctrine, which was the defense planning guidance from 1992. It sounds, you know, wonky and boring, but essentially Zalmay Khalilzad and Scooter Libby, working under Paul Wolfowitz, wrote this doctrine that said essentially the New World Order, as H.W. Bush called it.
In ending the long era of conflict and Cold War. We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders.
Would mean an era of unchallenged American supremacy. This is essentially, as Charles Krauthammer later put it, this is our unipolar moment. I guess he had earlier put it that way. This is our unipolar moment. The Soviet Union is out of the way. China is still broke. It's going to be another generation before they're rich and can do anything. All the European powers are weak and are our friends. Japan is our friend. So America dominates the world and there's nobody to stop us. And so, as Krauthammer put it again, we should seek nothing less than universal domination.
Yeah.
As Robert Kagan and Bill Kristol put it, they said, euphemistically, we're erecting a system of benevolent global hegemony. In other words, if anybody but us did it, it would be an evil empire. The Germans did it, if the Russians did it, if the Chinese did it, if anyone else tried to build the influence we're building, it would be for their evil, greedy self-interest. But in our case, much like the British, all we're doing is we're trying to spread bicameral legislatures and independent judiciaries and democracy and freedom and capitalism to the world. And so it's all very selfless. And when the anti-war.com boys argue that none of this is in our national interest, we say, yes, that's right. This is all so selfless. And we're doing this just for the good of the world. We're creating the liberal, rules-based world order of peace and cooperation and global governance and all of these things, all these kind of buzzwords, which, really have a lot to do with just helping Washington rationalize their imperial project. That there really is, if this was an empire, we wouldn't be doing it, but it's not. So we can. And then they do empire things, and they take advantage the whole time. They know that they're getting kickbacks. They know that they're getting a job at Raytheon when they retire. They know that, but then they just rationalize that part of it away. That's not why we're doing what we're doing, but hey, everybody's got to make a living or what, you know what I mean? When that is a lot of why they're doing what they're doing. And it also is, as I mentioned there about if it wasn't us, it would be someone else. You hear this all the time, and including from powerful people, that they really do believe that. And I would just submit to you that that's completely stupid. And I don't know, I just turned 49. So I remember at the end of the first Cold War, when all the talk on TV and in the halls of power in Washington and everything, among all the serious people on the Sunday morning news shows, are Germany and Japan going to rise again and take over the world now? No, right? Like how have Germany and Japan behaved for the last 30 years, right? 35 years. They have no interest in recreating their empires in their regions or that. And not just because America's keeping them down, but just because those eras are over. That's just bad business. They have too much trade to do with everybody else, and they don't need a forceful empire, right? Japan's greater co-prosperity sphere enforced at gunpoint. They don't need one of those to have trade with their neighbors in Eastern Asia now. And the same thing for Germany. So it's not just that America's doing it instead. It's that everybody can just make a trade pact. The era of the 20th century totalitarians is over, right?
So, yep.
And
Was it really that group of guys? Like I always think George H. Bush, Papa Bush, I feel like he was the head of let's call it the head of the snake. Like, was Reagan a neocon? Was Reagan part of that project?
Reagan was just a con.
Want the full truth? Watch the full Deep Shallow Dive interview next. And hit subscribe if you're done with narratives and ready to call a spade a spade.